I lost humanoid.
This is the war room.
I'm in the floor.
You can't fight.
You're in the floor?
Oh, she's in the floor. Uh-oh.
Yeah, I don't know how I got here. I'm trying to get out.
Can you respawn?
Can you respawn?
Hey, how you doing? No, how the hell you pronounce your name?
That's pretty close. This is like the theme song that I keep using, and we're gonna get it live from Rain, who wrote this song.
Cool.
And then we'll get into the normal show.
Hi.
Hello, Rain. Thank you for coming.
All right.
Let's do it.
It's gonna be alright. Alright. There's changes I want to see. See it tonight. See it tonight. And death still faces me. But I'm alright. I'm alright. I'll save you tonight. It's gonna be alright. Oh, babe. Baby. Thank you.
That was beautiful. That was really beautiful.
All right, here we go.
It's gonna be alright. Alright.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to ENDGAME with your hosts, Nomono, Poplopo, and guest host, Laozi.
Yeah, let's all just fake enthusiasm, like we're actually excited to be here. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Today, we're going to be talking about science fiction and how it inspires us and what it means. Usually, we do the community spotlight, but since we have our special guest, Rain, here, I actually want to hear from him. So, Rain, can you come up to the center? The question we usually ask is basically, how do you feel things are going? Like, where is humanity going to go in the long term? Like, we could talk hundreds of years out. Where does it ultimately go? How are you feeling?
Well, a lot of stuff is going on lately with there's just a lot of tension all around, and I feel like it's kind of stressful, you know. Like, there's tension, racial tension. There's just a lot of stuff that needs to be changed and could be changed, and I feel like something big's going to happen very soon, where humans realize that we're gonna have to make a decision on how we live our lives, and hopefully it's a life full of love and acceptance, you know.
So I sort of feel similar to you, of like this crisis point in the next couple of decades, but then, like, do you have any feelings for deep into the future?
Ooh, that's a hard one. Sadly, I don't think humans are gonna mature enough as a species to save the environment, so we'll probably all be in cities somewhere, and I mean, there's a chance we could help or like fix it, but in 100 years, I'm at the rate we're going now, I'm sure we'll just be in like some high-tech city, and like most people are going to be poor, and then the 1% is just going to get stronger, you know, like, and that really is a bummer to me, but there's always a fight to fight, you know.
That's sort of what you react to, I think, with your music. It is sort of about like this fight, or like, I mean, taking back winter, all that stuff. And so, like, that's what you're doing, right? Like, that's sort of an artist's job, is to like have that conversation.
I believe music's probably the best way of protest and starting a movement is music, personally, because anger surely doesn't do as well as many people would think, and just being a nice person doesn't really go as far. You got to connect to somebody internally, like with their heart, and song and melody really does that really successfully, you know.
I think the exact same thing about comedy. Like, I'm always thinking, like, this is the way we're going to fucking change people. Because you can't do it with logic and reason.
They're both very powerful because they evoke very, like, primal emotions, right? Like, music will just make you feel things, and comedy will make you laugh. Like, you can't help yourself. Those both evoke very strong emotions and kind of bypass our logic a little bit, especially when we need to. Because, like, comedy, I think, will make people, like, when they hate an idea, they'll hate it and be resistant to it, but then if they can laugh at it, it's not so bad.
Yeah, exactly.
So you're not entirely optimistic, but you're going to fight. You're going to go out in flames.
I'm going to fight as best I can, and hopefully humans realize that the path we're going on is not a good one.
Well, good luck to us all. So thank you, Rain, and let's get into the main... Are we supposed to applaud people? Yeah, thank you. The theme song that I used for the show... it's called Skyman.
Yeah, it's called
It's
Skyman.
so good. Oh, I love that.
Yeah,
I love it. So thank you for that.
If you want to check out my SoundCloud, that's some of my other music. That's Rain, R-E-I-G-N, just like my name. And my Instagram also has more information on Rain Checked.
So wait, everybody who's outside of the circle, God damn it, come inside the circle. It's the whole point of the circle. We're all included.
Stand outside it.
No, I don't like outsiders. I'm xenophobic. I want everyone to be in the cluster.
Get in the circle.
So hey guys, let's talk about science fiction. And there's a lot to talk about, but you had some good places to start, I think.
As we get started, I kind of want to talk established definitions. I've kind of found that that's a good thing to do. So science fiction, like what is the definition of science fiction, and how is it different from fantasy or speculative fiction? What is the distinguishing feature that you think of when you think of science fiction?
It's kind of more of a where we expect our technology to be going, where we think science will be heading in a future tense, but being shown to us now.
Something that isn't real right now.
So hard science fiction is basically, it tries to respect the rules of science as we understand them and posit how they would proceed in the future. Whereas soft science fiction kind of does the same thing, but tends to rule it out. For example, you might have FTL and soft science fiction, and hard science fiction probably wouldn't.
The best science fiction is one that takes an idea and says, what if this technology were to suddenly manifest itself? How would that affect the world? And I think that's the basic focus of most good SF.
Yeah, the other thing with SF is a lot of it is aspirational, particularly in what it inspires in what people want to do. VR, I think, is actually, we're in VR, and that's a great example of science fiction, because VR exists because enough people wrote about VR in science fiction before it existed that made the people who read that want to create it in real life. So if you talk to a lot of people who work for NASA and people who work in advanced science fields, they'll often say that they were inspired by science fiction that they read. So a large part of what it is to inspire people to say, that's really cool. I want to live in a world where that exists. How can I make that exist?
Science fiction as a genre is relatively new. There were, speculative fiction has kind of been around forever, but the actual focus on technology and tools and the what if element of development of technology is pretty new. I was doing some research, and it seems like around the turn of the century, from the 1800s to the 1900s, was about where science fiction started. With Frankenstein, which is sometimes seen as the first science fiction book ever. Yeah, so which I think is kind of interesting. So it's for thousands of years, as we were writing and telling stories, it was all looking backwards and at the present, and then around the turn of the century, we started looking forward, and we started looking ahead into the future and into the future that our tools might create for us.
Well, I mean, shit's moving so slowly back then. You can now it's really exciting, right? Technology is developing, and it's oh crap, this is really I'm interested. But if you're in a horse-drawn carriage and you're imagining, oh my God, what if I had 3 horses? and like that's your and like that's not very inspirational. Like I don't care.
Does that mean our imagination has improved over
No,
time?
because it used to just be more magic and fantasy based, right? Like I brought up Star Wars because I don't think that's really science fiction. I think that's fantasy, but there's a huge argument there.
Well, I mean, that's why they coined the term space opera. It's for science fiction that does not follow the rules of science, essentially. Basically, space opera was brought about as one of the ways that you can say it's not fantasy because it's not elves and dwarfs and magic. But it's
instead of wizards, there's Jedi. Instead of a sword, it's a lightsaber.
Exactly.
Because there's laser swords. Exactly. So yeah, it does fall under the SF umbrella.
Do you have
and
a
then there's new
favorite
ones that people come
subgenre?
up with. I do stay away from hard SF for the most part because I am lazy. Hard SF is actually difficult to write because you actually do have to research to some extent how your things work to make sure they're scientifically accurate. Whereas in non-hard SF, you can just say, nope, sorry, FTL. It works.
Right. Yeah.
Jump gates.
And I'm the opposite.
FTL, by the way, faster than light travel. I don't know if we.
Yes.
Everyone knows what FTL is. I'm much more into the hard stuff, man. It's got to get hardcore, and I got to believe it for me to enjoy it. Once it gets off into fantasy and stuff where I'm like, I don't buy this, I get really frustrated.
I like reading it. I like reading it. I just don't like.
Just not writing it.
I wouldn't want to write it because of the sheer amount of research involved.
So we should mention that if people that don't know you, right? You're writing science fiction.
Yes, I write science fiction and fantasy.
What kind of stuff do you like to write about?
Mainly it's stuff that I was inspired by when I was young, because I grew up on sci-fi and fantasy. So most everything that you end up writing is probably inspired by a kernel of something you saw or read or somewhere else like that. You get those ideas and they kind of beget other ideas. I've written like cyberpunk. I've written kind of a I guess the way I describe my current book is like basically the best Star Wars ripoff since The Force Awakens. Kind of how I pitch it.
I want to see like, what do you call those? Like those cardboard cutouts of the author with the book, and like we could just have them around the set with you like holding your book trying to sell it, and then we could insert a Bitcoin and get like a PDF out of it or something.
Ooh, hey.
Just one Bitcoin. That's all it takes to buy the book. It's so cheap.
Oh yeah, that's an expensive. That's an expensive book.
Expensive.
Bitcoins are up to like $2,000 or something now. So
Well, we'll see it next year.
Have you used any references
anyway,
from
we
VRchat? Have you used like stuff that you've seen here in your stories?
Oh, for me. So actually, oddly enough, my cyberpunk book deals with VR quite a bit. It's actually a big part of the story. But I think what surprised me about VRchat is not that VRchat has inspired the book, because I actually finished the book before I had even tried VRchat or VR. I was actually surprised by actually how close the book was to what VRchat is. I took my guidance from, Second Life and World of Warcraft and, online things and the way you saw people interacting. And that kind of informed how I thought it would evolve. And for the most part, it's ended up being pretty close to what I was expecting. So if anything, it's just been validating in that, oh, thank God VR is here and it's not completely different from what I wrote. It's one of the hazards of writing near future SF is that if it takes you 5 years to publish and in like year 4, a science discovery comes out that just invalidates the entire premise of your book, then you're like, no!
Definitely interested in hearing what inspired people, because like Laozi said, a lot of our like the stuff that sparks our creativity is something that we saw or heard, and then it kind of develops in our mind and just becomes like kind of a seed, right, for a huge imaginative, like an aspect of our imagination. Definitely want to hear about that with you and some of our audience members as well. Would love to hear some of the sci-fi stuff that has inspired you.
I remember, like, I was brought to tears a couple of times when I was young by some books, and like I think the first one that I remember was 3001, and like this is really lame, but in
Like
3001 they have
series?
they've got like the space elevator.
Oh, it's 3000.
And so it takes place 1,000 years after this. Yeah.
Oh, I never
So it's after Hal. It's
okay.
So like there's a space elevator. There's like a big city, I think, out in orbit. I'm getting this all wrong because it's been 20 years. But the main guy goes up there, and there's these gardens. It's all like a it's all enclosed. It's like automated. And the gardens are taken care of by raptors, velociraptors, because they were able to like bring them back and then mod them in some way that they weren't aggressive. And they would be the gardeners.
That's the idea. Okay, now I get that. I get that now.
That idea, like that brought me to tears. Just it's like, oh my god, the power! Like to be friends with a raptor, because I was obviously in love with Jurassic Park, and I was
Right.
like, oh my god, they're not scary anymore. Like one day they're going to be our friends, and they're going to be like gardening. And I just like that for some reason that blew my mind. And like,
It just blew
yeah,
my mind because I just figured out the origin of Chuck Tingle's book. Because I was like, why would he put a Velociraptor astronaut in space? And now I get it. You get the chance to check out Dr. Chuck Tingle's books. They are
Okay.
you would be entertained. Let's say. I think we're entertained by the name more than anything. But
I like that name.
have you read Childhood's End?
I haven't read any of them.
I read it a long time ago. Actually,
Is that the
it's
one
more.
with the
yeah.
devil aliens?
They made a miniseries of it recently, which is actually much fresher in my mind because I watched the miniseries. So
I kind of want to talk about it, but I don't want to spoil it. So like, I don't know how to approach this.
Oh yeah, I don't know how to
spoilers
talk
for
about it
a
without
50-year-old
spoiling it
book,
either.
folks. Like,
Yeah,
what
but
you
if
doing?
people in the
Get on
audience
that.
haven't read it,
I'm going to spoil
I mean,
just
there's
a
so many
tiny,
books that are 50
a
years
tiny
old.
part of it, because I think it has to do with a lot of the stuff that we do here. So there's this part in the book.
I read
They're
it
working on
in
some
the
kind
last
of
10 years.
machine that's like a Ouija board type of a thing, and you don't know what it is. And one of the characters starts using it at some point, and it's sort of like a Ouija board where there's like a lot of different communication happening, and you slowly start to realize it's actually sort of every voice on Earth like brought into this one thing to communicate with itself. And
Maybe I
it's
haven't
sort
read
of like
this. Okay.
reaching the singularity. It's like the moment where humanity is all able to speak at once and like move on together. That killed me. I was like, oh my God, we're going to be okay. Lau just disappeared. Is he? What happened?
Hmm. That sounds like people typing into Google. Like everybody like typing. You can literally see what everyone else has typed into Google just by typing something in.
So, because we're on that path, right? Like in our lives,
Yeah.
we've seen communication get quicker and quicker, and we're all much more connected than we used to be. And we're accelerating. And so it's about that point in time where like you reach, it's that point where you actually reach the singularity and everyone comes together and like it becomes magic. We go off in a beam of light or whatever. Like that was extremely inspiring. I mean, it was very hopeful, right? I'm like, oh, if we could just make it to that point instead of just blowing ourselves up like Rain thinks, which is probably going to happen. But, we'll see.
But see, that's the thing, though. If we don't blow ourselves up, like any number of imagined possibilities are actually possible at that point. Like that's the only thing we have to not do is not kill ourselves or kill ourselves indirectly by not killing our planet. That's the only thing we've got to do, and the rest of it is just we could just keep going. We'll just go and we'll do the things. Sounds great.
What do you think about just no one's up there, right? The difference between basically like dystopian and utopian ideas, right? With like in science fiction, basically because these things that blew me away are all very utopian. It's like everything working out. And I don't
know. I'm reading a book like that actually that like really blends dystopia and utopia. It's called Walk Away by Cory Doctorow. And like the book is sort of a dystopian future in that like in the near future, society at large is largely like controlled by capitalists and the income divide is huge and, all that. But then like there's this anarchist sect or whatever. But the book is like ridiculously optimistic about humanity and keeps being really, really positive about humanity. I haven't finished it, so I don't know if that changes. But like it's really interesting because most dystopian novels I read, like 1984, like are just ridiculously like completely pessimistic about human nature and the future of humanity and the human capacity to like grow and mature. And
pessimism serves a purpose. Like those books are about warning us about the future and like you should avoid this happening. But it's such a fucking bummer. And it's like more difficult to read, right? Like it's sort of easier to digest something that's more hopeful. But it seems to be less popular. Like I think that there's more dystopian stuff than utopian.
Well, the problem is it's harder to write utopian fiction because good fiction typically thrives on conflict. There has to be a conflict. There has to be conflict with the characters, with the story. And in a utopia, quite often the conflict has to be external. That's why in Star Trek, because Star Trek is utopian science fiction. The humanity has evolved to the point where there are no problems. Humanity is great, and so most of the problems that you see the Star Trek crew facing are aliens or malfunctions in their technology or things like that. So I think the reason you see it's a lot easier to write dystopian because it's like, oh, there's any number of problems that we can tackle.
It's just lazy to me though. Like it's the different.
It absolutely is.
In a horror movie, it's really easy to have dumb characters that get killed off. It's hard to have smart characters because then it's like, how do you write them into a situation that has conflict, right? Because they would be able to solve anything. And like, so yeah, it's more challenging, but that's what I want. I want smart people. I want to see things work out and how we're going to fight for it.
Yeah, I agree.
Going back on the stories and stuff, I actually did write some sci-fi stories at one point. The one, I think I got like 4 or 5 chapters done. It's called From Space with Death. This one big corporation took over like the northern part of Africa, built a building in their name with a big giant runway, and that was the space program for the entire planet.
Were you particularly inspired by any of the surrounding sci-fi media that surrounded you to write those things?
I think I was more disappointed with the fact that space travel is not accurately portrayed, and that's what I wanted to try to do, was get an accurately portrayed sci-fi space-based novel. You don't just fire thrusters right at a planet. You actually have to slow down, do an orbit, do a deceleration burn, make sure you don't enter the atmosphere too fast so you don't burn up.
So if we remember when Ghoster did the community spotlight, he warned us that we would get to space and then we would fuck ourselves.
Oh, yeah.
Is that where that belief came from? Sort of when you're talking about like this guy monopolizing space, and like, do you feel any differently today? It's been like a couple of months, maybe.
I mean, I still think we're going to get to space, and then that's somehow going to either end us or progress us to a point where we no longer become human.
Like my version of that when I was younger, and like, then I'm like 2 decades removed and I go back and I read my little science fiction stories, and they're so like, I didn't know it at the time, but I'm just writing down my own personal philosophy and worldview. So like when I read it now, I'm like, oh, I haven't changed. Like this is I still have all these same ideas. And at the time when I was writing them, I thought I was creating them and thinking of like fanciful ideas. And now that I'm older, I'm like, no, that's just like the way I think. I was just pulling out of myself my own beliefs, I guess.
That can kind of be the same thing, like creating it as your, like, you gotta, even when you've created it, you have to at some point discover it within yourself, I feel like most of us don't create our philosophies just from scratch. Like they always are discovered with, usually for me at least, I find out that I feel this way. Oh, I believe this thing, I put it together subconsciously as I'm working on something else, and then I find out, oh yeah, this is an aspect of me. Something that keeps coming to mind is how, like, I asked if we were more imaginative than we were, say, like 1,000 years ago, and you said no. But then Laozi was talking about how most of our imagination, like our creative stuff, like comes from like a spark, like an idea that we've encountered that then develops.
So my view on storytelling is it seems like we've been doing it forever. Like you look at cave drawings, right? That was storytelling. So I think humans do tend to process. We have dreams where we're processing what happens through our day, and I feel like the creativity is something that just kind of helps us cope. It's kind of like Nomono said, where it's almost like you are using what you create in a way as a coping mechanism to kind of project either your own thoughts or your own anxieties. And I don't think we're more imaginative than we were, but I do think that just the more leisure time a society has, the more evident it is, because you have more time to put your imaginative thoughts into a format that other people can see them. If that makes sense.
See, I guess I'm thinking, like, we just had, like, back in the day, even if we had leisure time, there was less stories, there were less art, there were less, like, expressive, creative avenues. It was not preserved.
It was just harder to preserve. I mean, I'm sure there were probably people writing, maybe stories by paper and quill that, they showed to 10 of their friends in their village.
Yeah, maybe
and those stories are gone because, there was no way to preserve them.
Control S.
But that's my personal thought. I don't have any evidence. That's just kind of how I feel about it. as examples, going back, you can look at like the Egyptian myths, for example, or even further back, the Greek and Roman myths, or before that, like Celtic myths. Like there is some crazy stuff in there, you know, there's like, you know, a wolf is going to go up and like eat the moon. And, you know, there's underworlds and people coming back from the dead, and even the stuff that we still have, not the stuff that's been lost. You know, it is very
the thing about mythology and religion and things like that is the stories involved, they're told to you, and then you're not meant to create new ones. You know what I mean? Like
I'm sure there was like back in the day in Greece, I'm sure people were writing like Zeus fan fiction, like there were the official stories. I'm sure there were people all over Greece who were like, yeah, this is where it's like, it was probably the first like Mary Sue, right? Or the first Gary Stu, the first author insert where somebody was writing fan fiction, you know, in Greece. Sure. Like, oh yeah, Zeus came down and we like totally hit it off and he married me and now I'm a god. You know, it's just unfortunately that fan fiction is not around for us to read. But
that is unfortunate. I would love to read
it was written.
It was just something related to just what you'd said earlier about sort of slight mix up between imagination and creativity.
Yeah, go ahead.
Imagination is, at least the way I understand it, is a small component of the entire creative process. So you've got, you know, the start, which is usually that kind of difficult to define sort of spark that gets you going on creating something. Then the end result is something that actually tends to have some kind of actual form.
I think of imagination pretty separate from, like, not necessarily part of the creative process, right? Because, like, throughout my entire life, I've spent many times more hours, like, just imagining things than I do actually creating things. So for me, sometimes it will turn into creativity, but most of the time it's just a story that lives in my head.
Is there a particular science fiction that has blown your mind?
Yes.
Only just science fiction, I'd say, but Babylon 5, the TV show.
Yeah.
Oh, I never watched it.
I've heard good things about it.
Oh, it fills in what Star Trek doesn't, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Star Trek's very technology focused.
Whereas Babylon
5's a lot of this, both the conflicts and the solutions, kind of like resolved through, or caused through relations between people, races, groups, whatever. I'd say it's more social than Star Trek, if in a sense. That's what made me like it more.
Now look at us. This is exactly what Psychor wants. They want us paranoid, afraid of each other. Divide and conquer. It's the oldest rule in the book. You know that.
Guess it wouldn't be a good time for me to suggest we all join hands and sing Kumbaya.
So you haven't told us what you found inspiring. Like, do you have a favorite science fiction?
Something that still makes me nervous to this day, which was something that I read when I was a kid, is Ender's Game. Where in Ender's Game, these children are trained to be like really good fighters and pilots and strategists and everything. And then, spoilers, they near the end of the book, they're being trained on this video game system to learn how to conduct battles in a digital simulation. Come to find out, it's not a digital simulation. Those were actually the real bad guys, and you actually killed them. Which has also been explored in other. And then they ended up not being bad guys. So that the whole thing was just ended up being a mess in the fiction. I don't know. I like thinking about stuff that makes me nervous, though. So that had a pretty good effect on me.
You were bred for this. You see things in a way we can't.
I wonder if there's a way we can come to a consensus, like in our little group here, what the best science fiction thing is, or like if there's something that we all are inspired by. Like I would guess Ready Player One is in the mix.
That is impossible.
I haven't read that one though.
To get somebody to agree.
How are you in virtual reality?
Sprawl trilogy.
Oh, I don't know. I don't think so. Who's the author?
William Gibson. That's
Neuromancer. I did read Neuromancer.
It's the first book in the
I haven't
series.
read all of his stuff. Oh, okay, all right. I've read part of it. No, I haven't. I really liked Snow Crash. Who else here liked Snow Crash?
I don't know if I got it. Like I reacted poorly, but
okay.
I don't know. It's been a while.
Well, there's a lot in there. There's a lot of freaking
There's a lot of meta
exposition,
irony,
and meta and like symbolism. Yeah, irony and like. It's very fast paced, except for when it's expositing, and then it's really, really slow. So it's got some issues, but it's one of my favorites. What about Otherland? I don't know if I've talked to anybody else who's read the Otherland books. But this is one of my first like cyberpunk books, and it's like this enormous well, the books themselves are enormous, and it mostly takes place in a virtual reality, and it's so good, and it's pretty obscure. So I guess
that's by Tad Williams, right?
Yeah. So this cyberpunk genre has really inspired me. I was also really inspired by video games, especially in growing up. One of the first video games I was ever into, and then was into for years and years and years, was the Marathon series. Anybody's ever played that?
Oh yeah, I used to play that.
Is that like pre-Doom? Is that what
the first
one?
one?
Right? Or...
It was Doom. It was Doom era,
Doom.
but it was on the Macintosh, and it was like it had this really rich, like deep, complicated storyline, which was unusual for that time, because like there's Doom, which was just like you just kill bad guys.
They killed your rabbit.
Yeah.
You have to go to hell or Mars or wherever I forget what the hell
there
Doom's
you go.
about.
The demons on Mars, and you must kill them.
Is there something on
agree.
television or a recent movie that we've all seen that's like hardcore science fiction? Like I haven't seen Alien Covenant yet. I don't know. I don't think I'm gonna like it. I don't think
saw
that's.
that. I like
That's
it,
not
but
good science fiction, is it?
It almost is. It's very, very close to being good science fiction, but
Oh.
it suffers from the same issue that you kind of brought up before, where they will have people make stupid decisions just to create conflict. And like, it's tragic and everything, but I would feel it would be such a better story and a better tragedy if the characters made intelligent decisions and still got their guts ripped out.
There must be
Let's
some
see.
big sci-fi show that we're all watching. There must be.
People are
Black
not
Mirror,
watching Black
but
Mirror.
man,
You have to watch Black
I've got
Mirror.
issues with Black Mirror. I wouldn't say it's the best sci-fi. It's definitely very good.
I'm not saying it's the best. I'm saying you should.
You guys,
But
it's the
it is
best.
inspiring.
It's really good. What,
It is really good.
do we have time to get into what your issue is?
Is it because it's dystopian?
Maybe. I guess it's the relentless pessimism. Just how ugly it gets. Oh, but that one
That's
episode
fair.
with the VR episode. Did you guys see that one where he goes into VR in his head and then he get like, oh, I freaking loved that episode. That was my favorite one ever. Oh, it was terrifying. It was awesome.
How has not everyone seen Black Mirror? If you're here, you should have seen Black Mirror. We almost talk about it every week, I feel like.
Each episode is totally unrelated. They're basically like their own little tiny movies.
Oh, and actually,
Twilight Zone
It's
series.
messed up though.
I would say skip the first episode because
Yeah, so that's
it's I
everybody.
think one of the roughest, and there's no reason to
Yeah.
watch it in order. So like that's I try to recommend people skip episode 1, jump to something else, and then if you feel really good, go back.
This episode doesn't seem to like jive with any of the other ones because it doesn't have like that same kind of science fiction theme. Because the first episode is something that could like happen today.
Well, a lot of it is stuff that could happen
started
today, right? It's like it's like very near future sci-fi. It's like what could we just do with the power of the internet? Like how bad could trolling get? Like how bad could
Some of them,
like
the Christmas episode was pretty far future. That one was like one of the most messed up ones. Oh, we should at least give a shout out to authors that we like. Everyone raves about Isaac Asimov
because he's the best. Don't make a face.
I'm making so many faces. I'm not like super impressed, but he was like old school, like back.
And he wrote like
1950s.
400 of them. There's got to be some good ones in there.
Very, very prolific. I'm sure there must be, right? You keep looking and looking because you got to find that.
Oh my God, the robot series. Detective Elijah and his robot friend going around solving mysteries. Oh, it's so much fun.
Oh.
And I love it because nothing
Never read
happens.
that one.
It's not like there's not explosions. There's not a big plot. It's like very simple. Oh, it's just my pace. It's good.
Oh, you know what sci-fi I like is all of Douglas Adams'
Oh, yeah.
Douglas Adams stuff, which is kind of rare, right? Comedy and sci-fi.
He nailed it in a weird way where it's like, it's obviously not hard sci-fi. It's like much more whimsical. But like the whimsy speaks very true to me. Like there's a lot of weird metaphors and stuff that you can read into them. And it's like, damn, this is true. Like this book is happening in real life. It's just being presented in a very like absurd way.
Okay, yeah.
One of the guys I'm reading now, actually, and quite enjoying, is Marco Kloos, who writes. His first book was called Terms of Enlistment, and he kind of took a little kind of the idea of Starship Troopers, the book where it's set from a very ground-based perspective of a person in a future Army/Navy. But it's engaging. You feel for the main character and the characters that he encounters. There is action, but it's written in a way that I think it balances building the characters and making you sympathize with them and having interesting action. Sometimes you will have, one or the other, but it does both of them very well.
I would love to hear if somebody has like something more one of the stories that actually inspired them or changed their mind about stuff. Like I was introduced to so many ideas through science fiction.
I guess it's super cliche, but when I was 14 was when The Matrix came out, and man, that one blew my mind. I mean, it was a sensitive time for me, and so, but that one, like, that was the first one where I really, I started thinking about the difference between realities and like which reality I'm taking part in, and like the possibility of, my perception being simulated and all that. Like that hit me hard around that age, and then has just kind of stuck with me.
Like, I think Fight Club and then The Matrix were the movies I saw in the theaters that like were kind of like life altering. And like, it's so common now. Like, we talk about simulation theory where we exist in a virtual reality. We're getting used to it. But if you could remember back just a couple of years ago before this, like when that movie came out, it was all new to me. The idea of going into the computer and like living in the simulation, like that blew my mind. And then you'd start to consider your own reality. And of course, we're still doing that today. Rain, are we in a simulation?
I am in a simulation right now, I guess, yeah. And I think it's kind of possible. And like the crazy part is like humans are creating these simulations like we're right now, like in virtual reality, and eventually we'll be able to create realistic simulations, and then it'll just be, if we are in a simulation, then it'll just be a simulation inside a simulation inside a simulation,
Right. We've heard that from a few people over the course of our series here, which is like that people keep saying.
That was my favorite comment. Yeah, I can't remember who said
go
it, but
deeper
it was
in.
that we were talking about Fermi's paradox, which is why we have not encountered aliens. All species get to the point where they develop super immersive virtual reality, where they can essentially make the perfect world for themselves, and then they basically just build themselves a Dyson sphere and all go into virtual reality and never venture beyond. And that's why
on that Dyson sphere we thought we saw like a year ago.
I haven't.
I actually like that theory.
About
like if you could build the perfect world for yourself and not have to risk the perils of space travel, why would you? It makes sense.
It makes sense in the world today when we're talking about like xenophobia and all this. I guess why would we seal ourselves in with everyone else that we hate? So maybe that doesn't make sense. We'd have to like get over everything and then hate everyone else in the galaxy to seal ourselves in. I'm curious if there's anything we can agree on that we should all read. I mean, Octavia Butler comes to mind only because Charlie suggested it.
Well,
or like for like maybe a month from now, because this is like a very general discussion. I would love to dive into something and really talk about what we think it means, or like how we're reading the symbol or whatever.
Read it, but if you haven't, like I think Ready Player One would be a great discussion because it's so pertinent to our existence.
Okay, raise your hand if you have not read Ready Player One. Oh wow! So
there's a few people. I mean, there's a lot of people.
It's like half.
But regardless, I think it would make a really good topic because it is.
Is that the where we should maybe start?
It's only a few steps removed from what we have now.
Let's suggest that as an endgame recommended book for everyone to read, homework or whatever, so we can all talk about it.
I mean, I have the book. I just can't find the time to read it. What is reading?
A lot of
there's a
80s
movie
nostalgia.
coming out. I keep forgetting about that.
Oh yes. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
If you're a child of the '80s, it will hit you. It will hit you.
For sure.
Speaking of sci-fi, you mentioned Jurassic Park. I think it technically counts as sci-fi. Love Jurassic Park, the book.
Yeah, it's the technology of like engineering, biology, and whatever.
Bringing back extinct species. Yeah.
Crichton was a weirdo, man, because like he did all this awesome stuff, and he had some silly ideas in his mind at the end. I forget where we were talking about this.
SF authors, like sometimes you don't even want to delve into their backstory. Like you don't really want to know what they're like in real life. I just want to enjoy their books.
Yeah, I know. It's hard for me to compute what I think he believes in reality with the themes that he puts in the books, right? And it's probably the same with many of these people where you're like, how are you writing this stuff that seems so deep and like it's so connected to it, but you also believe in this stuff that is whatever.
Yeah.
There's a weird disconnect there.
It's interesting. It's kind of fascinating, kind of frustrating. But yeah.
All right, so should we just wrap it up on that frustrating note? What's a science fiction way to end this?
Live long and prosper.
Shit, live long and my fingers used to do it. Remember when I was broken, I could do live long and prosper.
I had a broken one too.
I can do it because I've only got 3 fingers on this hand.
All right, everybody, thanks for coming. Let's everybody come up on stage. Oh, hit the secret lever or whatever.
The secret trigger. I'll go get the secret trigger.
And we're all going to come up here for a group photo.
Your eyes! I didn't notice the eyes wobble back and forth.
Your body is
slowly shit back into place.
That's because I just came through a teleporter.
It's like a science fiction pose.
So much.
Yes.
How about we all stand in our avatars in front of a virtual camera?
Okay, that's pretty crazy.
Wait, can you guys get closer together? Because you guys are like kind of spread out, and it looks like a little uncomfortable for a photo.
Like we don't like each other.
Yeah, a little bit.
It's just wings and
As I look about me,
Ghoster happened to the room.
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's me.
Oh, fantastic.
No, I want to show you guys my instant dance party avatar.
That is
all right.
a lot of articles.
I brought my sound
It's nice. I promise it's nice.